Hi everyone. Just give me one more second to set up and then we will go ahead and get started. Just gotta do my quick marketing posts. And I want to thank everyone for coming. We do these every Wednesday. And today's kind of a fun one. I get to talk about color because it's something that I believe is one of the two things about digital art. I believe color and light are the two biggest. So today we're going to be kind of focusing on the color aspects. Now to Twitter, Tumblr, all this fun marketing stuff. Okay, and as always, I will keep the comments on the side. So if you have any questions at all, even if they don't pertain to exactly what I'm working on, if it's just about digital art, any questions you may have about your own works, or just questions in general, feel free to ask them and I will answer them as soon as I see them. So why don't we go ahead and get started? I am ready. Hi, welcome everyone. I am Tim Von Rieden with ConceptCookie.com, and in today's live stream we're going to be talking about color. And the reason I wanted to do this is it's been requested multiple times, and I almost want to do a full course on color because I believe the importance of it is it's so important that I can't even explain it in just a simple tutorial or a live stream. I believe it would take multiple sittings, and it would take you guys observing and like analyzing what I'm doing, interpreting it, and then kind of executing it on your own. So I believe this is something you don't just learn from watching a live stream. You have to learn it through practice, and over time you'll kind of get familiar with what colors work for you. And honestly, you'll actually figure out what colors you'll enjoy working with more. Like I used to hate working with yellow, and now only recently do I find more of a use for yellow. And gray is something that I use more on my highlights and my bounce colors, which I wasn't really aware that I would be doing. And red has become my favorite color just because of the impactfulness that red brings with it. And that's something that you'll just find through time. So I want to thank you guys for coming to the stream, and hopefully you guys will learn something. But we do these every Wednesday at 2 p.m., and that's Central Time in the States, and that's -5 GMT outside. So why don't we just stop yabbering and let me go ahead and get started right here. So I was just working on the candy results, and I think that's why this kind of sparked an interest in doing color this morning. I just finished the gummy bear, and I've been realizing more and more that color and light can really make something that might seem dull in concept and make it extraordinary. So something as simple as a gummy bear or a sucker can, I mean, it's not obviously the most appealing, but then when you light it and you shade it in a way that, you know, grabs the eye's attention and makes it something to be more than just a simple gummy bear or a sucker. So that will be out on Friday, this entire worksheet, and hopefully I'll be able to polish it up a little bit more so it looks nice. And today, though, we're going to be focusing on this. And the reason I'm choosing a Pokemon, because a lot of color artists that I admire tend to choose Pokemon as their subject matter. And I understand why, because usually the shapes and proportions are very simple. So rather than being able to, or rather than spending time focusing on shapes and angular structures, they get to focus simply on colors and making the colors kind of be the bold statement of the piece rather than the concept itself. And oh man, a whole bunch of comments just made it through. So yeah, hello everyone. I want to thank you guys for coming. And yeah, if you have any questions, like I said, feel free to put it on the question app on the side here, and I will get to it as soon as I see it. All right, so here's our little oddish example. I'm going to make this bigger so that you guys can see it easier on the stream itself. Move my layers outside. And someone's asking, last time you talked about organizing class. Progress in that direction? Yes, absolutely. It will be available this either September, October, but we're going to do registration in August, and it will be all about getting started in digital art and kind of giving a path for those that might need some direction and might be a little lost on where they're supposed to be going. And I think this should be like an affordable alternative to art school, where having gone through art school myself, I feel a lot of that money and energy was almost wasted on an institution, a building, air conditioning, parking, like everything that really doesn't relate or pertain to my career. So I'm hoping that something like this, where we still get that classroom scenario, even though it won't be physically in person, you'll still get the experience and the knowledge that I'm hoping to pass on to you guys, at least any knowledge that I hopefully have obtained in the 4 years of kind of graduating from college and working at CG Cookie. Okay, So before I answer any more questions, let me get started on the drawing aspect so that I can answer questions while I'm drawing. So some examples, or no, this is the initial representation of the Pokemon Oddish. So you can see it's very simple. The leaves are green because it's plant foliage, all that good stuff, and he's like a blue purple with like red eyes. So this is a very simple look at how I would color the Pokemon. So then if I looked at my own doodle, I would think, okay, well then I would either color pick or I would just grab blue and then I would fill him in, and then for the shadows I would grab a darker blue and my highlights maybe a lighter blue. And that's okay. That's a very beginner way of looking at how to color something. Now that's not to say it's necessarily wrong, because I mean you can still create something that's pretty awesome by using basic colors, but why do something basic when you can make it extraordinary? And I think my greatest examples are either one of my favorite all-time color artists is Purple Kecleon, and let me see if I can pull up the examples she did. So she did the one at the very top, and the reason that I love her work is because like the hat on this guy right here. If you guys aren't familiar with Pokemon, I won't say names, so I'll kind of point them out. This guy right here in his hat, it's just like this green leaf thing. But if you color pick, which I'm going to do really quick, kind of show you guys what I'm saying here is like there are a lot of colors that went into this simple hat. So something that was primarily supposed to be just a green turned out to be like the spectrum of colors, and she really likes to bend colors, which I always try to tell people you should do. So rather than just working from a gradient of like a dark green to a light green, you should work on bending your color so that your shadows bend toward cool colors and your lights bend toward warm colors. And that's exactly what she does, and almost every one of her pieces is like just a prime excellent example. And the reason I wanted to bring up these examples is to show you the difference between something like this and the original. Because even though it has a different style, yes, the coloring is what makes it, in my opinion, that much more better and something that is, I don't want to say nicer to look at, but in a way there's more to look at, where your eye can kind of wander around the different areas and see the different nuances of color, and I think that's really interesting. And you don't really get that with the original concepts. So I'm going to kind of use that as my inspiration. And also something that I rarely do because I'm not a big line art person, but choosing a different color for your line art and maybe not being so monetary all the way through. So like in this case, like there's a lot of thins and thicknesses of the line, which is very important if you want to kind of create more of that interest throughout the line work itself, because otherwise then you're just having the same width, the same weight of the line all the way through. And then having that color variation is very interesting as well. All right, so hopefully I don't lose my breath. I've been like shortness of breath all morning, but I will hopefully try to do my best to keep up. So I'm going to keep the original design open, I think, throughout the entire stream, just so you guys can be able to compare it all the way throughout. So I think the first thing I'm going to tackle is his body. So I have this sketch on a sketch layer all its own right now. So why don't we go ahead and make a new layer underneath of it. I'm going to call it body. Okay. So my instinct would be, okay, well, we should grab that darker purple and fill them in. Yeah, that's simple, but let's take it a step further. Let's try adding some more colors. And I think I'm going to do this with my chalk brush. Or I might do this with my soft edge brush, because this is a technique I did in a recent tutorial that people really seem to connect and relate with. So hopefully it'll kind of do the same thing here. So I'm going to be choosing different colors, and I'm going to lay out every single color I use on the side here. So now in areas that are more in the shadow, rather than initially doing just like a darker purple, let's bend the color more toward a blue. And it'll make more sense as I go along, and especially when we get into the bounce lighting and the surface material highlighting, that'll be something that we have to kind of cater to. But for right now, we're just laying out a base color. And I always like to work darker and then build my lights on top. So I rarely will start with like a light base color. Even this right now, I'm going to go ahead, pull up my hue and saturation menu, and just turn the lightness down. And someone's asking, what was the artist's name who did that drawing with the hat? Her name is Purple Kecleon. Well, we did an interview with her on Concept Cookie. She is doing a tutorial for us, which will be out sometime this month. I'm really excited to reveal that one. And she is just a great artist. I really love her stuff. I met her in person. She's a great girl. So I would definitely check out her other work because she is just a ton. Especially follow her on Tumblr. She updates almost every day. So I'm not even worrying about if I'm going outside the lines. Right now, my only concern is creating some forms solely through contrasting colors. So now let's say that this was kind of like my base. I should have started by saying you also have to remember lighting at all times. And I think I skip saying this so much because I always have lighting usually coming from the same direction. It's like an overhead, slightly angled to the side, something like this. So this is our lighting. And this is going to be kind of directing where I'm placing a lot of my color placements. So now on the purple itself, I'm going to be bringing up my color picker. And you know what? I think I'm going to change the screen share so that you guys can see my entire screen because I think that would make it easier for you guys to... Well, no, I can't do that because then I got to keep my questions on the side. But pretty much, I'm going to grab this purple. So using Alt, my eyedropper tool, I'm grabbing that purple from the forehead. And then I'm bringing up my color picker. And I am going higher in value. And I'm bending it toward red, which gives us this sort of pink, slightly pink color. You can tell it has a more warm hues than cool hues. And that's because this color is more directed with the light in mind. So let's do that one more time. So I'm going to once again pull up my color picker. I'm going to go higher in value, and I'm going to bend it even more toward red. And then this will give us quite a bit more of a pink color, and it's definitely more warm. Where you can see on the bottom here, we got more of that warm, or that more cool sense with this darker purple. But then as we bend it toward our light, we're going to bring in more of those warm hues, and we're going to bring it right on top of Oddish. And people ask me all the time, how do you blend or how do you shade? And honestly, it just comes down to practicing with the different brushes and then getting a sense of, okay, this brush is really good at blending at this type of material. And since Oddish is so smooth, I'm using a soft edge brush. But if I was doing something that has a texture to it, like the sucker that I'm doing in the candy exercise, I'm using more of a chalk brush because it has a slightly textured feel to it. So I think I'm going to bring this pink one more time into my color picker. I'm going to bend it really heavily toward like an orange color. This will give that nice contrast feel. But I'm not trying to make my brush size too small yet because then I'll get too sucked into the idea of wanting to detail. So try to stay zoomed out as much as possible. And a lot of artists, I keep hearing more artists from different tutorials that say stay zoomed out, if not for the most part, for the entire time. And I've been finding that more and more apparent as I'm doing my own work of how helpful that is, because otherwise you're zooming in and you'll find yourself wasting time on areas that don't need to be wasted on. Okay, so now that we got our little Oddish base set, let's also remember that he has the feet down here. But the bulk of his body, this round sphere here, is going to be casting a shadow on the feet. So the ankle part of this body, and it's sometimes funny talking about a creature design like this or something that's so illogical in its function that it's kind of funny being like, oh, his ankles and his legs, when really they're just like little stubs. But we still have to treat it, and this is if you want to do more of a realistic lighting sense, where obviously you can have fun with it and like you don't have to have a set light in mind. But I do recommend trying it at least so that you can get used to placing different light angles and colors based on a light kind of in mind. And something that I think is also really important is I'm not adding any color to the shadow. I'm not like darkening it. If anything, I would lighten it up where it kind of, that shadow line meets, but for the most part, I'm not going to be darkening it. And that was something that I learned where you don't add value to the shadows. You don't add multiply layers to the shadows unless if it's absolutely necessary or if it really adds to the piece. A bit more realistic. Really try and leave the shadows as your base color as much as possible. I'm going to flip them, and this is something that I should have been doing more as well. And this is so that you can see it from a different perspective. It gives you a fresh look at what you've already created. Because oftentimes you'll be staring at something so long that your mind kind of auto-corrects it, even though if it's still wrong, but sometimes your mind will just get used to it. And it's almost like a swimming pool. When you get into cold water, it's freezing, and you can tell, like, okay, this is too cold. But then after a while, you kind of get used to it. And you don't want that to be the same case with concept art. Okay, so now, rather than trying to detail this guy even further, I'm going to make a new layer, and let's go ahead and get started on the leaves. So once again, my initial assumption would be, oh, okay, we'll grab that green and lay it all over here. Now, obviously, this is way too saturated and too light for anything I would ever normally do. So I'm going to pull up my hue and saturation menu, and you can do that from the top menu bar in Photoshop, where it's image, adjustment, and then hue saturation. But I have it set as a keyboard shortcut. I'm not sure if it's the original, but it's Command U, and I believe it's Control U on a PC. So all I'm going to be doing is I'm going to turn that lightness really far down, because like I said, I like to work with a darker base, so that way I don't have to build up my shadows and lights. I can just focus on building my lights. I'm going to change the hue of it so we're getting more of a warm feel, something around there. So it almost looks like spinach or something. So now if I go before and after, you can see the very clear distinction between the lightness and the darkness. Really quick, I'm going to answer some questions here. Tim, would you ever consider doing a live stream where you would give critique on our work, like help us and tell us what we could do better? Absolutely. So I'm thinking that, well, more or less I'm going to be catering this to the class that is going to be happening in September. I think I'm going to accept 25 to 30 students, and pretty much what we're going to do is every week, every assignment, I'm going to have like a one-on-one session where I'll talk about your work, what I think you can do better, and maybe do like a paint-over type thing. So that is something definitely that I've considered. Someone's asking, how would you go about adding movement in your artwork? I find mine very stiff. I would definitely recommend thinking about the work as a whole as an illustration. So you consider it from border to border, and you want to be adding like your S flows. There's so many different tricks I could talk about on that one, but I think I'm going to focus more on color for this one. But pretty much, if you're having a hard time flowing, just literally add interest to different areas of your piece that make the viewer look in different areas. So for instance, if I were to add this orange up here on this leaf, and then kind of bring it down on this side, I mean, you're going to be bringing the viewer's eye here first, and bringing it down, and it's probably going to go through the feet. So right now I got kind of like this motion going on. But if I wanted to have like a true S, like this, and I'm only saying you should go for the S because this is something that's been tried and proven that this is definitely a technique that works. And I would probably add a lot of interest to the under shading on this leaf here, make this really interesting, have some cool effects going on here, so that the eye's viewer starts here, then gets pulled into the forehead where the light is the strongest here, and then it gets pulled back down into the feet. So then it has that S curve to it. So that's one way of thinking about it. Someone's asking, does the orange apply to an orange colored light, or just continuing with the idea that highlights being warm and shadows being cool? So it's definitely continuing with the idea of highlights being warm and shadows being cool, but I'm definitely emphasizing it, like I'm overemphasizing it, because I find this to be so important that, oops, I'm going to erase that, that I'm really making it like orange. Like this is where the light's coming from, and I really want to, that's what I'm trying to do. I'm also going to erase right up there. And this is something really important. Having two colors butt up against each other, don't be afraid to let that happen. Like if the light source is coming from overhead, I think the reaction was, oh, well, we got to add a shadow here and make this really seemingly like a sphere. But if there's nothing casting a shadow on that forehead, why would we do that? We would keep it like this, and yeah, there would be a strong contrast of two different hues butting up against each other, but that's the key to adding realism, and maybe not even realism so much as a sense of interest, because those two budding, contrasting hues are what really will make your piece stand out. And that goes the same for value or hue or saturation. Those are the three things that can really draw your eye to different areas. So this is one of them. Okay, last question before I keep going is this a class, an online course, or is it actually in a class somewhere? So no, this will be an online course, and it will be probably through our website or an off website that we're going to be using, and I will be talking to people every week, and then we'll have live streams just for the students every week, and that's kind of what we're going to be doing. So no, it's not a physical classroom, it's definitely an online education system. All right, so back to the drawing here. So now that I got my green laid out, I guess I should make my swatches a lot smaller here. Let's play with the idea that we're going to be doing the same thing. So I'm going to bend my color toward the light, and since this green is already pretty close to the warmth that I'm going for, I'm just going to keep bending it upwards until we get kind of a dry yellow almost. And then for my shadows, I'm going to bend that green quite a bit, but I'm keeping the saturation almost the same. Because like I said, I'm trying to overemphasize the importance of color in work. Okay, so I'm going to be drawing right on top. So I'm keeping that light source in mind. Okay, we're going to have that heavy light here. And I think this is where people get too caught into trying to over detail things too quickly. So don't worry if it's messy or if it goes outside the line. It's something that we can all fix later on. And not even fix. I actually find it to save me time if I'm not catering to detailing so early in the phase. Now this leaf's interesting, where I think I'm going to have half of it kind of being light and the other half that's folded inward with that vein that goes down the center. I'm going to have that one reflect more of a cool color. I forget that I'm doing this all on one layer, so I got to make sure I'm really confident with my brush strokes. And this is something that, this is why I admire poor Pro Keklian so much, is because you can just tell that she is super confident in the way that she works on her stuff. And that's something I can't teach, and that's something that I can't like give to you or inherit. That's something that you have to find for yourself. Okay, so that's our first pass, and this is just with one color, so you can kind of see the difference with just the base color and the one color up. So now I'm going to go up one more, and now I'm going to pillow shade it a little bit, but I'm also remembering that I don't need to go all the way to the edges, so I'm going to bring it all the way down here. Rather, I'm going to kind of let it taper off just short of it. And as I do this, you'll be able to see the forms of the leaf start to kind of appear as well. And let's say I wanted this top half to be more angled toward the light than this bottom half, then I would kind of pick an area where there would be a slight crease, and I would just shade it upward based on where I think that crease would be. And when working with organics, you can really have fun with it not being perfectly crisp and smooth everywhere. And I'll get into detailing in a second, but like this leaf stem right here gets me really excited because I can just see like adding different little nuances in the middle and having it really pop. But I'm gonna control myself and save that for a little later because that's not exactly the point that I want to be doing this at. Now the edge of this leaf right here would probably be angled toward the light, so I'm going to make it pretty heavy here. So that I'm not treating it so much as a rim light, because a rim light usually means that there's a light from behind that's giving this intense edging, but for the most part it's just reflecting the light based on the angle of this leaf. And now for this leaf under here, I'm going to have some fun with that one, and we'll get to that one in a sec, but for the most part, I'm just going to leave it this dark green. And you'll see why once I get to it, But this will be one of those cases where adding gray will really enhance the color, and that it's really exciting when you first see it, because then you're like, oh my god, yeah, that's right. Like I can totally see myself using that in my own pieces, and it's such an easy and quick technique to use. So I'm pretty excited to show that one. Okay, now I'm going to go one more up, and I'm just going to slightly give it some more. I think rather than having it be like a defined crease, I think I'm just going to give it just a slight folding like this. And the reason I'm not touching the underside of these leaves is because I'm going to be treating these as a completely different color. Because the light, unless it's permeating through pretty strongly, it won't be seen too much on the underside. I mean, you might have some subsurface scattering, but for the most part, you're going to be reflecting the bounce light onto the bottom of these leaves here. So now this leaf that's being covered by the second leaf, so this one right here, I still have to remember that it shouldn't just be in shadow because it's behind the first leaf in the foreground. I'm thinking about if the light is passing this way, it'd probably be still hitting it pretty strong. So just automatically put it in shadow because it's behind this big leaf doesn't really make sense. Because yes, from our perspective, it should be behind the leaf and more in a shadow. But if we're thinking about putting our perspective on where the light angle is coming from, that's what you have to keep in mind. And actually, that's so important because that will really define your placement of color. So I'm going to go ahead, kind of keep at it. And this strong sense of contrast between these two budding hues will separate it. And you would think you would need a shadow to do that, but actually light will separate two objects from each other just as strong as a shadow will. Something like that. And I'm already getting excited because I can start to see where I can go with this. And I think that's the fun part. So if I started detailing too soon, I might not have gotten to the stage where it's like fun for me to see what can be. So now before I get too further, I think I'm just going to lay some basic coloring for the eyes. And the eyes, his eyes, or her, however you see Oddish, has red eyes. And red's my favorite color, and for me, I'm going to make that probably just a slightly more saturated than any other area, and one of the areas of interest. So I'm going to go ahead and lay out some pretty thick red eyeballs here. And this is a very warm red. And you might be wondering, well, what's the difference between a warm and a cool red? Well, a cool red tends to lean more toward purple or more of a pink. So something like this would be considered more of a cool red, where I could even get more warm with the red, where it almost starts to look more orangish, something like this. So you can see the difference between this one and this one. And they're still both considered in the red realm. I don't want to say red because obviously each color has like a specific name that you could kind of give to it. But for the most part, these are the two reds. But for Oddish's eyes, I'm going to start with a darker red because even that red's a little too saturated for me starting off. Because then what will be fun will be adding red to it after and adding that life to the eyes. Okay, really quick. When you create your own concepts, you seem to stick with analogous color schemes aside from lighting shadows. What is your method behind color schemes with concepts? I definitely work a lot with earth tones and desaturated colors. I find that muted colors often work best when you're trying to isolate different areas of focus. So if, like, for instance, if I wanted to bring the attention to the face or the eyes would probably have a slightly more saturation to it than the rest of the piece, and that's what will bring the eye's attention to it. So it's not that you're tricking the viewer, it's more of like you're helping guide them. You're pushing them to view what you want them to view most. And then I'm going to put some red in the mouth here. Now for the mouth, I'm going to kind of leave it for now so that we can focus on the other areas. But when I'm thinking about this, I'm almost thinking of like you're cutting into the sphere here, and you have to think that lighting right here would be hitting this top part of the mouth. It'd be casting a shadow into the mouth area, and like the tongue might receive some lighting, but for the most part it would be heavier in the front and then it would kind of recess as it goes back. Something like that. But I think I'm going to come back and we'll be able to render that later on. But for now, I'm going to flip it and let's continue with the next part. This is a good question. Someone's asking, what brush settings do you use? So currently I'm using a mix of a soft edge brush and a hard edge brush. So I've been using soft for everything but the eyes and the mouth, where I had to use a hard edge to really get those edges. But for the most part, I keep my opacity at 100, I keep my transfer at 100, and there's no shape dynamics. So it's this size no matter how hard I push on the tablet. Okay, so now let's go ahead and I'm almost thinking what I want to do next. I think the next thing I want to do is show you how to integrate gray and cool colors for your shadows. But first, I think it would actually be more wise if I went ahead and erased a lot of this excess. So this is often a fun time because then you're erasing what you don't need anymore, and then that's when you really get to see your piece kind of be separated from the background. So then after I erase all of this, I'm going to hide that sketchy line art layer because then I already have my colors kind of in place and I already know, kind of like have a pretty solid idea of where I want to go with everything. I don't need these line arts guiding me. Especially since oddish is such a simple concept. For something like this, I may not even have done a line art to sketch him out first, where it probably would have been easier if I just either silhouetted him out and then masked it and then colored it out that way. But I wanted to show you guys, because I feel like a lot more artists use line art first and then kind of color under it or over it, depending on what's easier for them. And even for this erasing, I'm just using a circle hard edge brush. And in areas that you want to get like in the cracks and crevices where there should kind of come to a solid point, I probably will zoom in just a little bit, cater to that area, make sure my hardness is on 100%, and then get in there and erase what's not needed. Someone's saying, what exercise studies do you recommend to practice with and experiment more with color? Great tutorial. I think the best thing that you can do right now is work simple. So even with this candy exercise, I actually think the candy exercise is a good one because it's really making you analyze these presumably simple concepts like a gummy bear, and then you'll realize how many colors really go into it. And even, I'm going to switch to this really quick just to explain it. Even with this licorice down here, you can see all the different colors, all the bounce lighting. Like this color right here is more of a pink. We got this red here, we got a darker red. Like there's so many different hues and shades that can make forms where you don't need line art. And I'm not trying to like harp on line art, but I think it's good for people to see that you can rely purely on two hues contrasting up against each other to create forms. Someone's saying, would you say that basic coloring like the one in the original image is better for animations and playing with color should be used for making better illustrations? That's a good question as well. I think it depends on what you're trying to do. So a lot of the times, like this oddish could almost be considered more of a graphic design item, where it's very flat coloring, or not in graphic design as well, but like a 2D animation. And usually it's because it's more efficient. Because if you were doing like intense shading on every frame, I mean, it would take you forever. Where sometimes it's more of a time thing. So since this is more of an experiment with color, and I want to create something that's more vivid and like colorful, I guess if you want to just say that, I am going to take my time and add a lot more colors, and I have that time to give. Where if I was creating a 2D animation where every still needed this kind of attention, I would definitely not add so much detail, or I'd probably work with flat colors. And also, it kind of just depends. Like, I have a lot of friends that work on casino, and a lot of what they do tend to be more flat colored. So they're not doing a lot of shading. But for the projects that they're working on, it's catering to what they need. So a lot of the times, it's like, what do you want to create, and what is the kind of outcome that you're wanting to recreate. So usually for illustrations, you probably want to work more with color and light. I mean, you can still work with flat colors and create a beautiful illustration, but oftentimes it is recommended that you try something like this. So you can start to really see Oddish and his forms kind of come to life as we erase all this excess. Okay, it's not a, I'm almost done here. And this is a stage that you don't want to overlook. Definitely try to make it clean, but just know that you don't have to like zoom in and make sure it's perfect, because you can do that as you go along. But pretty much this gives me something that I can then mask out. So I'm going to hide that sketch layer, and you can see what we're left with. So it's definitely pretty messy looking, but that's exactly what I kind of wanted. So I'm going to create a new layer above it. Oops. And I'm just going to clean some of this out. Or better yet, I'm going to work on that layer itself. Because oftentimes the line art will kind of hide a lot of the messiness that you'll sometimes get. And in areas where you get cracks and crevices, rather than trying to force your Silco brush to get really small and erase, just grab the selection tool, edge it out, and then use your eraser tool. And bam, you got a nice clean edge. And that's definitely something, I probably should have just selected most of this oddish concept and done it that way. That probably would have been more efficient, but sometimes it's just through trial and error. And the more that you do it, the more that you'll be like, oh, okay, this method seems to work better for me. I should probably stick with that one more. Like, here's another really good one where this leaf kind of meets the head. And gone. Yep, same for this side. A few more, and then we'll go back into more of coloring this guy. Oops. All right, so that's good enough for me to work with from here. Let's go ahead and move forward. So I'm going to make a new layer. I'll even mask out the ash that we just did. That's the whole point of erasing the excess. Now let's bring our gray into play here. So the reason I like using gray as my bounce light is because it will add a lot to the colors you already have laid out. Oops. Oh, that's why. Okay. So I'm just taking my gray and I'm just lightly kind of laying it over the bottoms of these leaves, giving the illusion that light is bouncing off of the, well, in this case, this gray background, and it's bouncing back onto the underside of these leaves. And then as we get closer to the head, I could even probably pull some of the purple and bring it into the leaves as well. So I think this is where a lot of artists get stuck, where they feel like they can't bring purple into the leaves because, I mean, there's no natural purple that's found in leaves for, or at least in this case. Like there's some leaves I'm sure out there that have a purple tint to them. But in this case, we're going to be bringing some of that purple from the oddish body itself and laying it right on there. And a lot of the times you'll hear artists talk about how they want to work with colors they've already established in the scene. And that's because it creates kind of this relative feel to it where the colors play with each other then. And they're bouncing and working with each other because they're already established. So I'm just working off that idea right now. You can see how that also separates forms from each other. So this purple is separating the two leaves from each other, but I didn't add any lines, I didn't add any shadows, I just added color. So I think that's really important to note, that you don't need shadows or even light sometimes to separate different objects or subject matters. All you need is just sometimes a color. Now as the leaves angle more toward the actual background, that's when I'll probably pull more grays rather than purples. Because the purples I'm almost treating as like it's reflecting off of the oddish body itself. But the grays I want to be more of like it's reflecting the environment around him. And I definitely have to be thinking about, okay, what kind of texture does the leaf have? Is it that reflective? Is it a reflective surface? And some of you might be wondering, well, it's a Pokemon, who really cares? Like, this isn't a realistic thing. But when you treat it differently than just kind of breezing or like brushing it off as, oh, it's just whatever, I think that's when you start to create something that's more interesting, because then you're adding more effort to it. Someone's saying, what sort of things should you be aware of when coloring a concept for 3D modeling? This is huge, and I think I always thought I was going to be a concept artist for a modeler, and I would be working like hand in hand with a modeler because of how much I was taught when I was in school to do it that way. So when working with a modeler, try not to hide any areas. That's a huge one. Really showcase whatever it is very cleanly and clearly. I think how well it reads is something you always should keep in mind. And if you're doing a turnaround, really make sure it's clear and concise of what everything is. And let me think. What I know there's a bunch of stuff I could think of. I think I would say the biggest thing out of everything is to make it read very cleanly. So that's probably my biggest advice if keeping in mind a concept for a 3D project. Someone's asking about, what do you think about Manga Studio 5? Have you had the opportunity to try it? No. I know there's, I think, two of my friends that try it, and one of them that uses it on a daily basis. And he loves it. And I think it's one of those things where once you become comfortable with the software, I mean, you're just attached. Like for me, Photoshop, I'm very attached to Photoshop. So while I could try out new softwares, because I think you can benefit from that as well, I definitely see more artists latching onto one software and kind of sticking to it. Now, that's not to say one's better than the other. That just means you're more comfortable in one. Because for the most part, they provide the same thing for the most part. I say for the most part because then there's some softwares like Corel Painter that give you more of a traditional feel. But I would say Photoshop gives you the all-around basic package you would need. Okay, I'm going to start coloring his body because it is bothering me right now. So for the bounce light, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to bounce that gray from the environment and bounce it back up. Now, I'm going to do this with the legs in mind, so I'm going to cater to the legs in just a second. First, let me lay it out, grab my eyedropper tool, and then blend it in. So sometimes I like letting some of the brush strokes be seen. So that's why I'm not working purely in like a soft edge brush where everything is like super blended. Alright, so now for instance, the leg would be blocking some of that cast shadow, so it won't be quite as strong right there. If you guys can hear birds, I had to have my window open. It's really hot in Wisconsin right now. As I'm drinking hot tea, I know. I don't know. Sometimes I don't know how my mind works or justifies things. Alright, so something like that. And then I would probably do slightly, not probably as heavy on the feet, but maybe just a little bit. Because when I'm rendering things out, I think this is why I always get caught in the what artists would call over-rendering, where you over-render everything and it creates this mess of like trying to figure out where is the eye's attention supposed to be focused on. So if I were to make the feet really nice and detailed, the eyes want to be drawn down there because it has that nice detailed look. But if you have everything detailed, then the eye begins to wonder, okay, like where should I look and focus on next? Okay, so now let's focus on those eyes. So I'm going to zoom in once just so you guys can see it a little more and see if there's any questions I can answer while I'm doing this. Someone's asking, do you use basic Photoshop brushes or custom ones? I use a mixture, or I used to use a mixture of both, but now I only use concept cookie ones. And the ones that I almost use for every tutorial, every live stream, is the free basic ones that are in our brush pack on the site. So you can download those, and like those have like the circle hard edge, soft edge with the slightly custom settings and the chalk brush. And those are the ones that I try to stick with the most because I really want it to be clear that you don't need fancy brushes to create something awesome. You can create something awesome just with a circle brush. I probably should have said before I did this, some areas like the eye, imagine if the eye was slightly pushed into this bulbous head here. So the light would be capturing this inner edge where it would be pushed in. This is what's really going to start separating your work, is when you start thinking of lighting this way and how to add to the different forms. Because right away you can see how the eye now looks slightly pushed in, and I probably could even do a darker one on the top. Not too heavy though. Where it gives that just slight illusion that the eye is being pushed in. And a lot of times when we're doing art like this, you're trying to create illusions of 3D, three dimension. So now for the eye itself, let's go ahead and, oops, I do have to do this on a new layer. Oh, there we go. So I'm going to pull up this lighter red kind of near the bottom. And this is something that I do in almost all my eyes. It's just because of the way that the light works with the iris. Usually the iris, in this case, I mean, I don't know what Oddish's eyes is supposed to be. But for the most part, an iris will collect the light in the bottom part of the concave area. And the lighter part, or the darker part, will just kind of be more on top. It gives that nice gradient almost. So I'm going to grab that lighter red. And maybe just a little more detail. Something like that. I don't want to overdo it right now. And for the mouth, same thing that we did with the eye. I'm going to grab that lighter color from the forehead here, pull it down under the mouth, give the illusion that the mouth is being pushed in. So I'm not sure if Oddish has a tongue or not, but I'm going to push the tongue back into the mouth. I always feel so strange talking about things that aren't reality, because then you have to kind of assume things about the creature or whatever it is. So in this case, I assume Oddish has a tongue. And then like, this is another great example. Okay, the back of the mouth. You would think there would be a transition from black, because we're recessing more into the shadow. But let's not do that. Let's try something different. So let's say we grabbed like, let's grab this color of all colors. Or you know what? Why don't we grab from one of the colors we used for the leaf? So I'm going to grab the light yellow that we used up here. And I'm going to place it right in the back of the mouth, and then just kind of gradient it out to the front. Because it gives that same illusion of depth without adding the shadow color. Because your mind always wants to assume to add depth or something like this, you would add a darker version of that color and then blend it out. But that's not true. You can do that with hues, you can do that with value, or you can do it with saturation. So even with this kind of nasty mustard color that we got going on here, we can make it work and make it look like the mouth is recessing into that lighter color. And even the tongue, let's say, I'm kind of going overboard with this, but I really want to showcase what I mean. Say the tongue, rather than get darker in red, went more toward this lighter blue. And even if it's super subtle, oh, you know what? I can't stand that blue. This is what happens when I start adding colors. I really have to be thinking about, okay, does this color make sense in the addition of the piece as a whole? Because that blue immediately drew my attention to it. And this is a good color experiment where even like the mouth color, it might be a little bit too mustard brown, where if I made it more green, it probably would work better. So I'm wondering, let me see if I just separate that color. Probably be smarter if I did it on a new layer, but let's say I separate that color and I change the hue. Okay, I kind of like blue for in the mouth. So let's work with that. So I'm gonna kind of cover up some of it. It's a little too intense for me right now. And a lot of this is all very personal aesthetic, where you can kind of decide whether or not something's working. So to kind of bring that blue into some kind of like relation into the rest of the oddish, I'm going to blend it with a purple. Because right now that blue stands out so much that it needs, for me at least, some reasoning to it. Because you don't want to just add a color just to add it. And I think that's another thing that a lot of beginner artists do. The worst thing is usually just not adding any color variants at all. So I like that if you're at the stage of where you're adding colors to it, But then you want to start, not just adding colors just to add them. This is another really good example of where if I bring in a more intense version of this blue, all the eye attention will go right here. You can see the difference there. Okay, so now I think I'm going to drop these layers into one. I'm just going to quickly liquefy it where the head is just being pushed up a little too much right now. I know you guys can't see this, but it'll be done in just a second. There we go. So I just pushed the leaves down a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to make a copy of that layer just so I can save it and then continue working. So I think the next thing I want to do, because I know we're cutting it close with time, I'm going to go over the time limit on this one though. So I think this one is an important one, and I'm kind of having fun with the piece. So maybe let's give it another 15 and see what we get. Okay, so earlier I was talking about like the underside of these leaves. Now let's go ahead and let's say I fill them in with that gray background color. And you can see what that does. It really does separate it. So if I turn that layer on and off, you can see how it separates the edge of the leaf from the back of the leaf. And normally I have either Deandra or someone else with me that will help redirect questions, but she's in Minnesota and my other guy is in another country. So that's why it's taking me a little longer to answer all the questions. Okay, here's a good one. Someone's asking, this is off topic, but do you think it's possible to achieve a high level of digital skill without taking any classes? I heard that taking classes is actually very helpful. What are the benefits of taking a class versus being self-taught? So this is a great question, especially since I felt when I was in school, I wasn't concept art. Since my school was mainly a 3D education program, I actually graduated with a 3D background. So my background isn't in digital art, but that's what I really wanted to do. So every day when I would get home, I would just come home and start drawing. And it was a struggle a lot of the times, but since I didn't have internet in my apartment, I didn't really have anything better to do, either watch movies or just draw. So I'm glad that I ended up just drawing all the time, because then I was forced to self-teach myself. I didn't have tutorials really to watch. I mean, we had some Gnomon videos in the library that I would watch, but for the most part, it was all self-taught. But I think the one thing that the classroom experience did give me that you can't get online or being self-taught is having people there to compete with. And I'm not saying like unhealthy, I'm saying like healthy, and that gives you someone to compete with. And I had someone, her name was Nubia, and we were always compared on our skill level, everything. And I think having her there to give me that competition of like, oh, that's what she did. She did a really awesome job on that character's leg and the way that she colored this certain area. Now I gotta one up her. Like I gotta do something even cooler. And I think having that presence around is really important, and that's something that you don't get online. But having said that, I do say online is where it's at, because you can literally find anything on like any tutorial you want online. Like YouTube has so many, it's kind of funny that like schools and institutions are charging, I mean, just under $100,000 for an education, when really you can get most of what they're teaching online for free. The one thing that you just can't get online is that classroom, that physical classroom experience. And that's why with the workshop that I'm doing in the fall, I'm really hoping to try to recreate that as best I can, having gone through both scenarios of having been self-taught but also going to school at the same time. I'm trying to give both the benefits of both. So yeah, that's definitely something where you don't need to go to school to get an education. It will help you in some ways, and a lot of the times it's mostly just through the people who you know. And you'll hear a lot of times people say it's who you know that will get you a job, sometimes more than your actual skill level. So I hope that helps. Someone's asking, do you tend to work on one layer then more than switching layers for every color? Depending on how confident I am with the piece. And I definitely think you guys will notice that too as you work. If you're feeling not so confident about like, oh, should I add this color here? Will it look okay? I'll probably make a new layer. But if I'm feeling like, yeah, I definitely need that color there, just add it and keep going, then no, I probably would just keep working on that same layer. So as I'm working on this leaf right here, this is a good example where I almost wish I had more time where I can just, or I wish I could just time lapse this where I could work at like super speed and do all the leaves at a nice quality, where I'm trying not to over detail things. I'm pulling colors that are already established in the piece and adding to this one. Then I'm adding areas of interest. So my area of interest is right here. I'm trying to centralize it more toward the center. So I'm not trying to like over detail things on the leaf out here. But as we get closer to the root of the bulb of this guy's head, I'm definitely adding smaller brush strokes. I'm making it more detailed. And that's just something that will direct the eye more down there. And don't feel afraid to cut into your line work. I find artists like that, if you already established like a silhouette or a line that you really like, you get intimidated by cutting into it. Where even like the top of the stem, I thought it was pretty good, but I'm going to go ahead and cut into it a little more because I really want to make it stronger. And oftentimes in fear, that's when we don't progress or we don't achieve a cooler result. So don't let fear be the reason of not trying something on your piece or trying to make it better. Oops, I'm going to flip it. So you can see how this leaf right here, I'm really liking that leaf, and you can just tell there's a bunch of different colors. We got gray, we got some orange, we got some purple hues, greens, and they're all playing to create this oddish. And I find it a bit odd. Oh, that's my terrible joke of the day. And don't be afraid to let color come right up against the edge of the silhouette. Where oftentimes is another thing where artists always feel like they have to blend everything. But it's okay if you just let a color butt up against the background or another color. You don't have to shade everything. And that took me a while to learn, where I felt I needed to shade everything, make it look as realistic as possible. But oftentimes then you lose interest factor, or it might not look as neat. Okay, so now this stem gets me really excited. And I know that sounds really weird, but for instance, I know lighting is coming from this direction. So the area right here, I can make more crisp with this lighter green. And it'll add such a cool look to it because it'll really plump the leaf out itself. Like that. So it's funny on things that you will find yourself getting excited over while you're drawing. And I think this is why I work in color over black and white, because then I find areas like this and I can really pop them out with color, and it gets me excited. Like I'm excited to work on weird little areas like that. And I don't want to overdo it. I almost overdid it there. Or just kind of let the cool factor just be. Like you don't have to overemphasize or like direct the attention there. Be like, this area is cool. You should be looking at this area. Just let it be cool on its own, and people will recognize it. Like that. So I'm really liking that leaf. So imagine if I could do that everywhere, then that's probably where I would take it. Okay, someone's asking, would you say there is a prime age for learning digital art? I see so many digital artists around who are way younger than I am, but 10 times as good. So what's funny is like I'm seeing so many, I can't agree with you more, where there are kids in high school that are creating like these unbelievable pieces, and I'm looking at them like, are you serious? Like I didn't even know what Photoshop was 4 years ago, and that's what you're able to create when you're in high school. Like when I was in high school, I didn't have any of this, so I mean, it was all kind of like magical to me when I first found it out. But when I see these younger artists, it's because they're adapting to the technology, and like they have the skill level. So if they have the drive, yeah, it doesn't surprise me one bit. But I will say, for an ideal age, I think it helps if you've been working in art all your life. And this is something that I keep reiterating. I feel like every live stream I say it. But Feng Zhu's tutorial on building a visual library is so important and so true that I feel like you need to enjoy movies and watch or play video games and all this other stuff while you're younger. You got to build your visual library because then when you're older, you can reference that. Where if you didn't have all those experience or like read books or travel and then you try to get into digital art, oftentimes your art won't have that factor that some artists just have, and that's because they've been kind of adding to it their entire lives, where some artists just don't have that benefit. So you can start drawing at any age. It's just depending on how strong your visual library is, how determined you are, and how much time you're willing to give to practice. Okay, this Oddish is definitely a fun little piece for me to work on. So this is why I like simple concepts like this, and I bet this is why I like Purple Kecleon loves to work on Pokemon, because then you can really just have fun with color and not so much have to worry about creating this over complicated concept with like leather bands everywhere. And I can really find this to be just very relaxing. Like if I had music on in the background right now or even something on Netflix, this would be perfect because my mind's kind of in autopilot mode. And that's something I'll talk more about in the workshop as well, is how you get to a point where if you can lay out the concept in like the first hour, then the rest of it you're just kind of on autopilot, and it's very relaxing. And that's why people do this for a living. And that's why it doesn't burn them out. It's because then when you get to a certain point, you just fall in love with what you do because it's very relaxing. Okay, so now up here where the second leaf is behind the first leaf, I'm going to cut right into it I'm going to use my brush tool, and I'm just going to, so that's the first leaf, and then I'm going to bring it right down, creating that nice hard edge. As we get deeper, probably pull some of those pinks back in there. Something like that. I almost want to use my selection tool, which I think I might do. There, like that. Sometimes, yeah, it is hard to really showcase that this is behind this object with just doing color. So I'd probably even grab a lighter green to really emphasize that, yes, this leaf is behind this leaf in the front. Okay, so I guess before I cut the stream off, I'm going to go ahead and work on this face area just a little bit more. So oftentimes when you're working purely with color, you want to avoid using white and black, unless if like it's for like a purposeful reason. Usually you want to avoid white and black. And I'm not saying that that's a like never use black and white, but like a lot of artists often say it's better to try to avoid it. And if you're adding light, try to avoid using white and try to use more warm colors and see if that works for you. And same with black, rather than using black as the shadow, try adding cool colors. Or try adding a bounce light. Like for this example, we use gray as like the bounce light on the bottom of this oddish. And that's what gave it its form rather than just a shadow. But now if I have this guy, I think I am going to add, so it's a very tiny right here to give that eye more of that, almost like a gelatin look to it. Something like that. And you can see without and before and after the difference that that makes. It's that little white dot. So if you use white, use it sparingly and very minimally. Because otherwise, if you add highlights everywhere, sometimes it gets too distracting. But now let's add just a few highlights on the forehead here. Because like I said, we want more of the detailed areas to be right in the central area. So by making my brush size smaller and just adding like little nuances of brush strokes or something, it'll pull the eye's attention there. I think I'm going to leave that stem of this big leaf in front, that green. And I really wish I had more time to kind of fill this out more. You know, maybe I'll just give it 5 more minutes. I'm really liking this concept and where it's going. So okay, so for this big leaf, yeah, I like that we got some of that soft edge going to give me colors to work with. But let's go ahead and sharpen it up a little bit. So light source is still coming from overhead. So just like we were doing earlier, I'm going to use that indent on the leaf. And this is something that is huge. This is actually a huge concept that this is what you should focus on right now, more than anything. So whenever there's an indentation, so for this represents this leaf right here, this little leaf indentation. If the light is coming from this direction, it's going to be very prevalent here and then here. But since the light is coming from, or the angle of the leaf is going to be very intense right here, you're going to get a highlight right there. And then it might taper off on either side. And maybe you'll get some highlights here and there. But for the most part, you're going to get that. So now where it goes down, it's going to be more in shadows. There isn't going to be a lot of light. So this is a good example. Let's go ahead and lighten up the inside of the crack, and we're going to butt it up right against that darker green. You can see how that instantly separates the two forms from each other. And it just gives it that much more oomph. And you can do that everywhere. So then let's see, if the light was coming from that direction, probably do it sort of at the same angle. This back leaf's a little different because it's kind of angled directly at the light. But just so we can really push more of that illusion, let's go ahead and kind of do the same technique here as well. Once again, grabbing that background color, not being afraid to cut back into what we've already established. And heck, even if you wanted to have some fun, let's say you wanted to have like a little indentation or like a rip into the leaf. But you gotta be careful with that because that immediately draws your attention then right to that indentation, where if I leave it out, you see how it's not so prevalent or as strong. And now here's another good example of underneath these leaves up here. Let's grab that purple that we had over there. Lay it on pretty thick here. And then this is going to be really cool because then I'm going to grab that background color, edge it out. Like that. I could even bring more of that gray in there. Or even let's bring some more purple. Sometimes fantastical lighting can give you a cooler overall representation of what you're trying to create. but it still gives you that form. Not as logical, but it definitely adds more interest to it. Like that. And you could do the same for the underneath of this leaf too. Now obviously you don't have to get as intense or go as nuts as I kind of am with this, but I really just wanted to emphasize how color can really add contrast. You don't have to just rely on shadow and light or saturation. So for the most part, these colors are generally in the same saturation field. So I'm not like oversaturating one area to add contrast. For the most part, it's all kind of in the same realm. Okay, so I'm going to answer just a few more questions, and then I'm going to go ahead and cut the stream off while I'm finishing kind of detailing them a little more. The main question was, does the orange apply to an orange colored light? Oh no, we answered that earlier, I'm sorry. So someone's asking, would you suggest laying base colors for the entire piece, background and all, before highlighting and shadowing? That's the technique I use. Is that the one I would say, yes, you have to use this? Absolutely not, because I think every artist has their own way of doing things. But I would say try as many ways as you can until you find one that you're like, yes, this is it. This is the technique I've been waiting for. It's really comfortable for me and it works really well. The outcomes are great. Because even like, I know a lot of people harp on the burn and dodge tool, but if it is something that when used correctly, it really works and gives you the result that you're looking for, why not use it? Like I know it has a bad reputation, but when used correctly, it can create some awesome looking images. You know what, this might be a good example of where I could give them an outline that's not a typical black outline. Even though I said earlier I don't typically give things outlines, but I think just for this demonstration, I want to give him an outline. So let's work with this pink, and then maybe as we get more into like the shadow area, comes this darker, slightly darker pink. And I would probably pull it around. Then as we got more toward that color, I would probably pull this lighter outline color again, and I would do that everywhere. Giving it different weight throughout as well. I think that's really important to establish. Someone's asking, how do you add a fitting background so that your work doesn't float on the page? Because every time I try, it's just awful. So with this kind of a guy, I had it in mind that there wouldn't really be a background. But if you're one of those people that you want, or not even, if you go into the mindset of like, this is gonna be a full blown out illustration piece, then yeah, I would probably work with a background in mind. So I'd probably work from the start with a background included. So doing what I did, where you're kind of like detailing and finishing this oddish up before you're adding the background, I think that's a very poor choice, because then you have this awesome detailed foreground image, but then your background you're kind of stuck with and you don't know what to do. And it is harder, unless if you did it on one layer where you can kind of add it behind. But even that, I would still recommend to integrating it from the start. So now for his legs, really quick, this is a good example of where I can use that bounce light, because I wouldn't really be receiving any of this orange yellow light if that's kind of what I established as my light source, but it would be getting some of that bounce light from the ground. And this is what will also help establish form. Let me go ahead and just lightly bring it in. See how that will round out the legs, and I could even give it some like nice punches of highlights here and there. like that. Man, now that I'm looking, those legs look like they were dipped in a different color because I lightened up the rest of his body so much, but I didn't lighten up the leg part that was in shadow. There we go. All right. Uh, where do you go to network with artists and get feedback for your work? After graduating, finding someone to critique my work has become difficult. If you want to, it's funny. There's 3 people that I've met through these streams and have kind of joined my art gang, if I want to call it that. And every day we talk. Every day these artists are my group of people that I will post updates on something I'm working on or something they're working on, then we'll give honest feedback. I think finding that art community can be tough, and that's what an art school gives you that you don't get with that online education, kind of going back to what we were talking about earlier. But I would say if you want, you can definitely find them, but it'll take some time and definitely some researching. So for me, it was like kind of convenient where people found me, where it's like through the stream, people would just like find my email, ask if they can join the Skype hangout that we always do, and just kind of go from there. So I mean, if you're really interested, you can send me an email, and then maybe we could add you. I know I'm guilty of just adding a bunch of people on the fly, but if you're really serious about improving your work and you want honest feedback, then definitely finding a group of people is the best way to go about doing that. And, or even like DeviantArt, finding different groups that you can be included in. Okay, so what do you suggest for someone starting in digital art? Keep practicing, practice every day, minimum of an hour. Just keep doing that, and eventually you will get better. How do you start with drawing and concept art if you're completely new to drawing itself? I can't draw round shapes or perspectives. Then you really have to spend time working on building up your fundamentals. I I don't think it is helpful or benefits you if you are trying to create like a masterpiece when you don't even know, like what you said, how to draw a sphere or a shape correctly. I think you really have to build up your understanding of your fundamentals first. And I always compare it to like building a building. If you don't have good fundamentals, then the rest of the structures won't be quite as good, and it could fall apart at any given moment. So I definitely think build on your fundamentals and go from there. Someone's saying, are you familiar with Matt Core's process from Control Point? Yes, absolutely. I actually interviewed him a few years back, and his websites was one of my main inspirations when I first started with Concept Cookie. And he definitely gave me a good look at like, okay, how to structure videos and how to edit videos. So yeah, I really like Matt Core, and I think he did a great job with teaching beginners how to begin. Someone's saying, I've heard people mention that when you're coloring a piece, you should decide on a main color in order to tell how saturated or desaturated other colors should be. Is this always the case? How should we go about picking the main color it is? This is a good question. I know this is a technique that I know some artists use. I think it's more or less to help kind of decide the mood of the piece as well. So for Oddish, I chose like a slightly warm but quite bold color to represent him. And I think that's because that's kind of how I feel about the Pokemon itself, where he's a very soft-spoken looking character. He's not like intimidating. So I chose colors that kind of reflect that. And that is, I think, what they're trying to say with that is like you want to choose colors that reflect the piece that you're working on itself. Someone says, yay, I finally came on time. Awesome. Any tips on how to improve? Keep practicing every day, like I said. And let's see here. Someone's saying, do you put your color on a multiply layer over your line art, or do you put your line art on a lower opacity above your color layer? So since my line art is usually so soft, I usually put it above my color layer, and I don't change the opacity. But that could work with a multiply layer or even with a lower opacity on the layer itself. So either one, any of them would work. And I think we're almost done with the questions. Here we go. Oh, sorry, I merged the layers down before I could show you guys what the eyes looked like before and after. Someone's asking, do you always use this method of painting over bounds? Does it somehow make it easier to color, or is it just personal preference? It's definitely personal preference. This is just one way I like to do it. Like I could go about probably 4 different ways of coloring this oddish and still feel pretty comfortable and confident in any of those 4 ways. I think just because of over the years, I've kind of experimented with so many different ways of going about coloring and working on a concept piece. But this is definitely one of those that I feel, I would say, fairly confident in being able to color whatever the task is given in front of me, depending on if the line art is in concept's already there. So a lot of the times I think people get stuck where they struggle with the concept while they're coloring. So really establish a firm, confident like concept before you start coloring. And I think that'll help greatly improve the overall image itself. If you guys have any more questions, I'm going down the list here trying to answer as many as I can before I cut the stream off. Let's see here. Someone's asking, how long are you going to grow out your hair? It looks pretty cool. I would say as long as it takes for me to look in the mirror and be thinking, I look a little homeless, I probably should cut it. But as of now, I kind of like it, so I'm going to keep growing it out. When adding lighting like this, do you vary your brush opacity? No. So this is something a lot of artists do, but I do not, where I keep my opacity at 100% all the time. I think it's because I became comfortable with using it at 100%. But if you find yourself feeling more comfortable doing it a different method, do it that method. Even if it's not exactly the way an artist that you follow has done it, do it your way. Because if you start using other people's techniques and like forcing it to become your own, then you're going against what you're naturally inclined to do. So definitely work with your natural sense of where do I want to add my color, how do I do this technique, because then you'll form your own interpretation of how to execute different techniques. Okay, someone's asking if I could do another Pokemon next week, Pidgeot. I definitely think I'm going to do a few more. I know I did a Pikachu one a little while back, and I think Pokemon are just a great subject matter to tackle because, one, they're familiar, so you can kind of get a sense of like their shape and design. But then this way, we don't have to focus on the concept, but we can really focus on the coloring and lighting, and I think that's really important. So yeah, I will probably do a Pokemon in the future. I don't know about Pidgeot. I think if I did, I would probably do, well, maybe, who knows? Yeah, that would be a good one because then we have the colors with the hair of Pidgeot. And yeah, I definitely used Pidgeot when the first time I played Pokemon Yellow. Someone's asking, how does bounce light work? Or better asked, how do you know where it is and what does it basically change on the color? So this is a good question where oftentimes I'll pull from the environment. And knowing how strong the bounce light is going to be, sometimes you have to just analyze real life examples. So I know there's a lot of tests out there where they'll like hold a lamp up to a red piece of paper and then turn or like angle that red piece of paper toward a wall, and you can actually see the red bounce from, well, not physically, but like on the wall you'll see the red, and that's due to the bounce lighting from the light hitting the red paper and then bouncing and then hitting the wall. So sometimes even with stuff like this, I like to overemphasize bounce lighting because of the effect that it gives. So even with like how strong do I know how to put it on the bottom of Oddish, you kind of have to guess it because obviously this isn't a real creature and we're using fictional lighting because we're drawing it. We're trying to interpret lighting and make it the illusion that lighting is real and in the scene. So I think just maybe practice over bounce lighting your subject matter and then kind of pull back. So once you kind of establish a solid knowledge of like, okay, this is how to add bounce lighting, then really pull back and be like, okay, now I can make it more subtle. And that subtlety oftentimes will give you that greater look to your piece. Where this one, I really went overboard where there's bounce lighting everywhere. But I really wanted to showcase how to color something like this. Someone's asking, how would you do rim lighting with a soft brush? I would probably mask out the subject matter and then add the soft brush, but for the most part, actually no, that would be exactly how I do it. Someone's asking what kind of program to use for drawing. I use Photoshop CS6, and I do dabble in Mischief as well. Okay, I think I'm going to have to cut this since we've done answering for like the past 10 minutes. I want to thank you guys for coming to this live stream. With Concept Cookie, we do these every Wednesday at 2 p.m. Central Time, and that's -6 or -5 GMT outside of the States. We will have this candy exercise all finished and ready to go on Friday. So if this is something you're working on, I definitely recommend doing it, especially when I was doing the gummy bear this morning. Like I just did the cast shadow from the lighting permeating the gummy bear and then falling onto the paper or whatever the gray is background layer on behind it, and it really gives that illusion of depth and realism. So I definitely would say give this one a try. It's a lot tougher than it looks. It's not just shading candy. You really have to analyze and interpret the lighting and how it affects the surface and material of the candy. So I think this is a really great exercise for you guys to try, and the results will be out on Friday. And then tomorrow, we have a full tutorial coming out from John Thacker. And let me show you what it looks like. I'm really excited for this one. Bam. He did a really awesome tutorial on the swine riding warrior. But I think the focus of the tutorial was coloring or drawing without fear. So that one will be released tomorrow. And I hope you guys will enjoy that one. And yeah, I will be here next Wednesday. I'll talk more about the upcoming class that you can register for if that's something that interests you. And thank you guys for coming. So stay tuned for next week at 2 p.m. And yeah, that's it. Okay, I'm done. Bye, guys.